She's nobody. Just take her home." My mother laughed when she said it. Not a nervous laugh, not an awkward one, a confident laugh, the kind that comes from believing the room belongs to you. I was standing just outside the study when I heard her voice float through the half-open door, light and dismissive, like she was talking about an object that had been misplaced, not a person. "Honestly," she continued, lowering her voice slightly, "I don't know why you're indulging her. She doesn't even understand what's at stake." There was a pause. Then my aunt replied, quieter but amused, "So you're sure she won't find out?" My mother scoffed. "She won't. She never does." My hand froze on the banister. They were talking about me. I knew that immediately, not because they said my name, but because that tone had followed me my entire life, the tone reserved for someone who existed in the family but never belonged to it. I leaned back against the wall, heart pounding, the house suddenly too quiet around me. She's grateful just to be here. After everything we've done for her, she won't question a thing. My aunt laughed softly. "And the inheritance?" "Oh, that's already handled," my mother said smoothly. "Once the paperwork's finalized, it won't matter what she thinks." Inheritance. The word hit me like a slap. I stopped breathing. They were planning something big, something final, and they were certain I was too insignificant to notice. I didn't go into the study. I didn't interrupt. I did the one thing no one in my family ever expected me to do. I listened. I stayed still until their voices faded, until chairs scraped against the floor and footsteps moved toward the kitchen. Then I slipped quietly up the stairs, my legs shaking so badly I had to grip the railing. My room felt unfamiliar when I closed the door behind me. Too small, too exposed. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, replaying every word. "She's nobody. Just take her home. She won't find out." I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to slow my breathing. My entire life suddenly rearranged itself in my head, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. The sudden kindness over the past few weeks, the unusual phone calls, the way my mother had insisted I come stay for family time, and most of all, the way she'd been hovering around my grandfather. My grandfather, Daniel Whitmore, was the only reason I was still connected to that house. He was my mother's father, but in every way that mattered, he was mine. When my father died when I was 12, it was my grandfather who stepped in quietly. No speeches, no promises he couldn't keep, just presence. He taught me how to balance a checkbook, how to fix a loose door hinge, how to read people without underestimating them. He never raised his voice, never belittled me, never treated me like an inconvenience. And when my mother remarried and slowly started acting like I was a reminder of an old life she wanted to forget, my grandfather never changed. "You pay attention," he used to tell me, tapping his temple with a crooked smile. "That's a strength. People think it's weakness." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. He was sick now. Not dramatically, not in a way that brought casseroles and sympathy cards, just quietly declining, the way strong men sometimes do, refusing to be a burden, refusing to admit the end was near. And suddenly, my mother's behavior made sense. The way she controlled his appointments, the way she answered questions for him, the way she'd brushed me off whenever I tried to be alone with him. She wasn't protecting him, she was managing him, and whatever inheritance he'd intended for me, whatever he'd quietly promised without paperwork yet, she was planning to take it, because in her mind, I was nobody. That night at dinner, I watched her with new eyes. She served my grandfather first, fussing over his plate, touching his shoulder just a second too long, smiling sweetly. "Eat slowly, Dad," she said. "We don't want you tiring yourself out." I noticed the way she watched his fork, not with concern, with calculation. "So," my stepfather said casually, "have you thought any more about your will?" The table went quiet. My heart slammed against my ribs. My grandfather looked up slowly. "What about it?" "Well," my mother said lightly, "it's just practical. Things are complicated these days."
I kept my gaze on my plate, but every muscle in my body was tense. She continued, "I don't want any confusion later, especially for someone like her." She nodded toward me without looking. I felt heat rush to my face. "I'm right here," I said quietly. She smiled. "Of course you are, sweetheart." Sweetheart. That word had always meant know your place. My grandfather's eyes flicked to me, then back to my mother. "I already know what I want," he said evenly. She waved it off. "Oh, Dad, you always say that, but paperwork matters." "Not everything needs to be written," he replied. I swallowed hard. She leaned closer to him, lowering her voice. "Let's not complicate things for people who aren't equipped to handle them." Something in me snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. I pushed my chair back. "I think I'll check on Grandpa's medication. He mentioned earlier he was missing something." My mother stiffened. "I've already handled it," she said quickly. "I'll double check," I replied, standing. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. I walked around the table, my legs steady now, fueled by something sharper than fear. When I reached my grandfather's side, I rested a hand on his shoulder. "Are you feeling okay?" I asked softly.
He looked up at me, and in his eyes, I saw recognition. Not confusion, not weakness, recognition. "I'm fine," he said, "but I could use some air." "I'll take you," I said immediately. My mother started to protest. "That's not necessary." "I insist," my grandfather said calmly. She smiled tightly. "Of course, just don't tire him out." As we stepped outside onto the porch, the cool night air hit my face like a wake-up call. My grandfather sat down heavily in his chair, breathing slowly. "Grandpa," I said quietly, kneeling beside him, "can I ask you something?" He studied my face. "You heard," he said. It wasn't a question. My throat closed. "I didn't mean to." He waved a hand dismissively. It was bound to happen. I stared at him. "They're planning something about the inheritance." His mouth tightened, not in surprise, but in disappointment. "I know," he said softly. My heart broke a little. "Then why?" "Because," he interrupted gently, "I needed to see who you'd become when the truth finally showed itself." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly. "You didn't confront. You didn't panic. You paid attention." Tears burned my eyes. "They think I'm nobody," I whispered. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low and firm. "They think wrong." I let out a shaky breath. "They're going to try to take everything," I said. He nodded. "They already tried once." My head snapped up. "What?" His eyes hardened. "Years ago, I stopped it." Fear and anger tangled in my chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because," he said quietly, "I needed you to grow without knowing what they do to protect themselves." I swallowed. "And now?" "And now," he said, placing his hand over mine, "it's time." "For what?" I asked. He looked toward the window where my mother's silhouette moved behind the curtains. "To remind them," he said calmly, "that I never planned to leave my legacy to people who treat my granddaughter like she's disposable." My breath caught. "But they think the paperwork—" He smiled then, a slow, knowing smile. "Let them think that." My pulse thundered in my ears. "What did you do?" I asked. He squeezed my hand. "Enough." Inside the house, laughter drifted out. My mother's laugh. She thought she was winning. She thought I was nobody. She thought I wouldn't notice. She was wrong. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling of my childhood room, the same faint crack near the corner, the same pale glow from the streetlight outside, except nothing felt familiar anymore. The house I'd grown up in suddenly felt like enemy territory, every creak of the floorboards sounding like someone listening on the other side of the door. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. Let them think that. He had already done something. Not recently. This wasn't a desperate last-minute decision. Whatever he'd put in place had been waiting, quietly, patiently, just like him. That realization steadied me more than fear ever could, because if there was one thing my family consistently underestimated, it was quiet resolve. The next morning, my mother was unusually cheerful. Too cheerful. She hummed as she moved around the kitchen, setting plates down with unnecessary force, the sound of porcelain against wood sharp in the quiet room. "Good morning," she said brightly when she saw me. "You slept well?" "Yes," I lied. She studied my face for a fraction of a second too long, as if searching for cracks. "You should take your grandfather to his appointment today," she added casually. "I'm swamped with calls." That was new. She never gave up control that easily. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice even. She smiled. "Good girl." There it was again, the same phrase she'd used my entire life when she thought she'd won. My grandfather was already dressed when I went to his room, jacket buttoned, shoes polished, papers neatly stacked on the desk. "You're up early," I said. He smiled. "Couldn't sleep." I hesitated, then lowered my voice. "About last night." He raised a hand. "Later. Walls have ears." I nodded. On the drive to his appointment, the car felt like a safe bubble. The city passed by outside the window, normal and unaware, while my world felt like it had tilted on its axis. "You don't need to protect me," I finally said. He chuckled softly. "I'm not. I'm correcting a mistake." I glanced at him. "What mistake?" He replied, "Letting them believe they could rewrite my intentions." The appointment itself was uneventful. Routine tests, polite nurses, the familiar smell of antiseptic. But I noticed something else. My grandfather was sharper than my mother liked to portray him as. He asked precise questions, corrected a dosage, and made a joke that had the nurse laughing. He wasn't confused. He wasn't fading. He was being managed. When we got back to the car, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim envelope. "Take this," he said, handing it to me. I didn't open it. "What is it?" "A copy," he replied. "Not the original, but enough." My fingers tightened around the envelope. "Enough for what?" "For you to understand the game," he said simply. I didn't open the envelope until I was alone. I sat in my room, door locked, heart pounding as I slid the papers out. They weren't legal documents, not exactly. They were letters, dated over several years, addressed to different people: an attorney, a financial advisor, a trustee. Each letter referenced me, not vaguely, not sentimentally, specifically. My full name, my date of birth, my relationship to him. One line made my breath hitch. "My granddaughter is the sole beneficiary of the Whitmore Trust, effective immediately upon my passing or incapacity, whichever comes first." Trust. I reread it 3 times. My mother hadn't mentioned a trust. She'd talked about a will, and that was when I understood. She wasn't stealing something that was already hers. She was trying to intercept something she couldn't touch by controlling access, by manipulating timing, by keeping me uninformed. But trusts don't work that way, and my grandfather had known exactly who he was dealing with. That afternoon, the house filled with voices. My aunt arrived first, heels clicking sharply across the floor. Then my cousin, then my stepfather came home early, tension visible in the way he loosened his tie. Something was happening. I stayed in my room, listening. "She needs to be realistic," my aunt said. "This isn't a charity." My mother sighed dramatically. "I know, but Dad gets sentimental." "And the girl?" my cousin asked. "She won't contest, will she?" "She doesn't even know," my mother replied confidently. "And by the time she does, it'll be done." I closed my eyes. They were planning to move fast.
That's when my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "This is Mr. Callahan. Your grandfather asked me to reach out. Please confirm you can meet tomorrow at 10 a.m. My pulse spiked. Mr. Callahan? The attorney? I typed back immediately. Yes, I'll be there. The meeting the next morning changed everything. Mr. Callahan was nothing like I'd expected. No flashy office, no dramatic speeches, just a calm, meticulous man who spoke carefully and listened more than he talked. "Your grandfather anticipated this," he said, folding his hands on the desk. "He's been very clear." "Clear about what?" I asked. "About who he trusts and who he doesn't." He slid a folder toward me.
Inside were official documents this time. The Whitmore Trust. Established years ago. Assets listed in detail. Property, investments, accounts I didn't even know existed. And there, in black and white, beneficiary, me. "Your mother is not a trustee," Mr. Callahan continued. "She has no authority here." I swallowed. "Then why is she acting like she does?" "Because she believes she can influence outcomes if she controls information," he said calmly. "Unfortunately for her, this isn't a will that can be pressured or amended casually." Relief crashed over me so hard my hands trembled. "She's been telling people I don't understand what's at stake," I said quietly. Mr. Callahan smiled faintly. "People who say that usually fear being understood." He leaned forward slightly. "Your grandfather asked me to tell you something, in his words." He cleared his throat and read from a note. "If they underestimate her, let them. The mistake will be theirs." My eyes burned. When I returned to the house that afternoon, the atmosphere had shifted. My mother was tense now, moving quickly, snapping at small things, checking her phone repeatedly. She looked up when I entered. "Where were you?" she asked sharply. "I had an appointment," I replied. "With who?" she pressed. "With someone who answers questions," I said evenly. Her eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means I know," I said simply. The room went silent. My aunt froze mid-sentence. My stepfather looked between us, confused. "What trust?" my mother asked, her voice tight. "The trust," I said, "the one Grandpa set up." Her face drained of color. "That's," she started, then stopped. "You weren't supposed to find out," my aunt blurted. Too late. My mother rounded on her. "I told you to be careful." I watched them implode with a strange sense of calm. "You lied to me," I said quietly. "You called me nobody." My mother straightened, trying to recover. "You're being dramatic." "No, I'm being informed." My stepfather cleared his throat. "What trust?" My mother shot him a look. "This isn't the time." "It is now," I said. I turned to him. "Grandpa set it up years ago. I'm the beneficiary." The room exploded into overlapping voices. "That's not fair. She manipulated him. He was confused." I didn't argue. I didn't need to, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for permission to exist in that room. I was standing on ground that was already mine. My mother finally looked at me. Really looked at me. "You think this makes you powerful?" she asked bitterly. I met her gaze. "No," I said. "I think it makes me untouchable." Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, she had no response. That night, my grandfather knocked on my door. He moved slowly, but his eyes were bright. "I heard raised voices," he said mildly. I smiled. "They know." He nodded. "Good." "They're angry," I said. "They always are when control slips," he replied. I hesitated. "Are you okay?" He sat down carefully. "I am now." I swallowed. "Why me?" He looked at me for a long moment. "Because," he said finally, "you never tried to take anything from me." Tears slid down my cheeks. "You listened. You stayed. You didn't see me as an asset." He reached out and squeezed my hand. "That's who legacies are for," he said. Outside, I heard my mother's voice rise again, sharp and furious. But for the first time, it sounded distant, unimportant. Because whatever she planned next, she was already too late. The first thing my mother did after realizing she'd lost control was pretend she hadn't. That was always her pattern. When something slipped through her fingers, she didn't react immediately. She observed. She recalibrated. She smiled too much and spoke too softly, as if volume alone could bend reality back into shape. For 2 days after the truth came out, she acted almost pleasant. Too pleasant. She brought my grandfather his tea herself. She asked me if I needed anything from the store. She even complimented me on a sweater I'd owned for years and that she'd never acknowledged before. I didn't trust a second of it, because people like my mother don't give up power. They just change tactics. On the 3rd day, the pressure started. It began subtly, the way all effective manipulation does. My aunt cornered me in the hallway while my mother was resting. "You have to understand," she said gently, touching my arm as if we were close. "Your mom is under a lot of stress." I removed my arm calmly. "We all are." She didn't mean what she said, about you being nobody. I held her gaze. She meant it when she thought I couldn't hear. Her aunt sighed. "Families say things." "Yes, and families also do things." Her smile tightened. "You don't want to tear everyone apart over money." That was the pivot. Money, not trust, not betrayal, not manipulation, just money. "I'm not tearing anything apart," I said evenly. "I didn't create the trust. Grandpa did." "But you could give some of it up," she pressed, "to keep the peace." There it was, the ask. I smiled faintly. "Peace built on silence isn't peace." Her face hardened. "You're being selfish." I stepped past her without another word. That afternoon, my mother finally dropped the act. She called a family meeting. No notice, no agenda, just a sharp demand that everyone gather in the living room. My grandfather sat in his chair by the window, quiet but alert. My stepfather hovered near the doorway, already uncomfortable. My aunt and cousin sat stiffly on the couch. I stood. I wasn't going to sit for this. My mother positioned herself in the center of the room like a conductor about to raise her baton. "This has gone far enough," she announced. "We need to talk like adults." I almost laughed. "You went behind my back," she continued, glaring at me. "You involved lawyers. You embarrassed this family." "I didn't involve anyone," I replied calmly. "Grandpa did, years ago." She waved that away. "He was influenced." My grandfather's voice cut through the room. "I was deliberate." She turned to him sharply. "Dad?" "No," he said firmly. "You don't get to override me anymore." The room went silent. My mother looked stunned, not by his words, but by his tone. He rarely spoke to her like that. "You're not well," she said quickly. "You're confused." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm clearer than I've been in years." She laughed sharply. "You're giving everything to her, a girl who's done nothing." That was it. I felt something inside me go still. "She's done nothing?" my grandfather repeated quietly. "She's lived off us," my mother snapped. "She's never built anything." I finally spoke. "I worked 2 jobs through college. I paid my own rent. I showed up when you didn't." My mother scoffed. "That doesn't make you entitled."
No, I replied. It makes me honest. My aunt jumped in. Let's not make this personal. It's always been personal, I said. You just didn't think I deserved to know. My stepfather cleared his throat. Maybe we should slow down. No, my mother snapped. She thinks she's won. I met her eyes. This isn't a competition. Yes, it is, she said coldly, and you don't even know the rules. That's when she made her fatal mistake. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder.
I have paperwork too, she said triumphantly. Documents Dad signed last year. Changes, clarifications. My heart thudded. My grandfather didn't move. Those documents, my mother continued, name me as executor. They give me discretion. She slapped the folder onto the coffee table. Checkmate. The room buzzed with tension. Slowly, my grandfather stood. It took him a moment, but no one dared rush him. "Did you bring copies?" he asked calmly. My mother frowned. "Of course." He nodded. "Good." He turned to me. "Call Mr. Callahan." I pulled out my phone immediately. My mother's face paled. "This is unnecessary." "No," my grandfather said. "This is overdue." Within minutes, Mr. Callahan was on speaker. My mother launched into her explanation, voice confident, rehearsed. She described the documents, the signatures, the dates. Mr. Callahan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked one question. "Were these documents notarized?" My mother hesitated. "Yes." "By whom?" he asked. Another pause. "An associate," she said. Mr. Callahan exhaled slowly. "Daniel," he said gently, "do you recall signing any amendments last year?" My grandfather shook his head. "No." "That's because," Mr. Callahan continued, "the signatures on those documents do not match your verified signature on record." The room went dead quiet. My mother laughed nervously. "That's ridiculous." "Additionally," Mr. Callahan went on, "the associate you mentioned is not a licensed notary." My aunt gasped. My stepfather looked sick. My mother's face twisted with fury. "You're lying," she hissed. "I'm stating facts," Mr. Callahan replied calmly, "which means those documents are invalid and potentially criminal." Criminal. The word landed like a bomb. My mother stood abruptly. "This is a setup." "No," I said softly. "This is what happens when you assume no one is paying attention." She rounded on me. "You did this." I met her gaze steadily. "You did." My grandfather sat back down slowly, exhaustion etched into his face. "I trusted you," he said quietly, "and you tried to steal from your own child." "I did it for the family," she snapped. "No," he replied, "you did it for control." The room felt like it was closing in. My aunt stood up. "We should leave." "Yes," my grandfather agreed, "you should." They left in a rush. My aunt, my cousin, my stepfather trailing behind my mother, who didn't look back once. The door slammed. Silence followed. I stood there shaking, not with fear, but with the aftermath of adrenaline. My grandfather looked at me. "She showed her hand," he said. "And lost," I replied. He smiled faintly. "Exactly." That night, my phone lit up with messages, accusations, threats, guilt-laced pleas. I didn't respond, because something had shifted permanently. She'd crossed a line she couldn't step back from. Forgery wasn't manipulation, it was desperation, and desperation leaves a trail. The house felt hollow after they left. Not quiet, hollow, as if something rotten had finally been pulled out, leaving behind a space that didn't know yet what it was supposed to hold. I stood in the living room long after the door slammed, my heart still racing, my hands cold despite the warmth of the house. The air smelled faintly of my mother's perfume, sharp, expensive, suffocating. I hated that even now, after everything, it still felt like she occupied the space more than I did.
My grandfather broke the silence first. "You should sit," he said gently. I hadn't realized I was still standing rigidly in the middle of the room. I sat beside him on the couch, careful, like he might shatter if I moved too suddenly. He leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, and let out a long, tired breath. "I never wanted it to come to this," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "That's the difference between you and her," he said. "You know when to stop." I swallowed hard. "What happens now?" I asked. He opened his eyes and looked at me, really looked at me. "Now," he said, "the truth finishes what it started." The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They came in layers. The first layer was legal. Mr. Callahan called the next morning. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it now, professional concern sharpened by urgency. "The documents your mother presented are serious. Forgery of that nature isn't something that can be ignored." "I don't want to press charges," I said instinctively. He paused. "This may not be up to you." That stopped me cold. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Forgery involving estate documents triggers mandatory reporting, especially when it involves an incapacitation claim." My stomach dropped. "I can't press charges," I said quietly. "Yes, which means this is no longer just a family dispute. It's a legal matter." When the call ended, I sat there staring at my phone. I'd spent my entire life trying not to make waves.
Now, waves were coming anyway. The second layer was social. News travels fast in families like mine, not through official statements, but through whispers sharpened into weapons. By the end of the week, I'd heard at least 5 different versions of the story. I'd manipulated my grandfather, I'd isolated him, I'd threatened him, I'd stolen documents. In one version, I was a cold, calculating opportunist. In another, I was a naive pawn being used by lawyers. I recognized the tactic immediately. If they couldn't control the truth, they would flood the narrative. But something unexpected happened. People started asking questions. Not of me, of her. Why were the documents fake? Why wasn't the trust mentioned before? Why did Grandpa's attorney contradict her story so directly? Silence followed those questions, and silence, I learned, is loud when it has nowhere to hide. The third layer was personal. My stepfather called me late one night. "I didn't know," he said quietly. I believed him. He'd always been passive, present but absent, the kind of man who let louder personalities steer the ship. "She convinced me it was for the best," he continued, "that you weren't ready." I closed my eyes. Ready for what? He admitted, for being seen. That honesty surprised me. "She's always needed to be the center," he said. "Anyone who threatened that, she pushed aside." "I wasn't trying to threaten her," I replied. "I know," he said. "That's why she was afraid." We didn't talk long after that, but when the call ended, I felt something loosen inside me. Not forgiveness, understanding. And sometimes understanding is enough to stop carrying someone else's weight. The fourth layer came from my mother herself. A letter, handwritten, slid under the front door like a final gamble. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. My name was written neatly, deliberately. Inside, the handwriting was familiar, controlled, elegant, precise. "I never wanted to hurt you. You forced my hand. You don't understand how much pressure I was under. This family needed stability, and you weren't capable of providing it." I laughed once, bitter and sharp. She still didn't see me. She still thought control was love. The last line made my chest ache, not with sadness, but with clarity. If you do the right thing now, this can all go away. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I put it in a drawer, unanswered, because that was the only response it deserved. My grandfather declined quickly after that, not physically collapsing, not dramatically fading, but growing tired in a way that felt final.
He spent more time sitting by the window, watching the world move without him. I spent more time beside him. One afternoon, he handed me a small wooden box. "I made this years ago," he said. "I always knew who it was for." Inside were photographs. Me as a child, sitting on his shoulders. Me at graduation, smiling awkwardly. Me fixing something in his garage, grease on my hands, proud and focused. "You were never nobody," he said softly. "They just needed you to believe that so they could stay comfortable." Tears slipped down my face. "I'm scared," I admitted. He smiled gently. "Good. It means you're paying attention." The legal notice arrived 2 weeks later. My mother was formally under investigation for document forgery and attempted misrepresentation. It wasn't dramatic. It was efficient. She didn't call me after that, didn't write again, didn't show up at the house, because at that point there was nothing left to perform. Her power had depended on silence and assumption. Both were gone. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls gold, my grandfather reached for my hand. "You know what the hardest part is?" he asked. "What?" I said. "Accepting that your own child can see you as a means to an end," he replied. I squeezed his hand. "You didn't fail." He smiled faintly. "No, I just waited too long to intervene." He looked at me seriously. "Promise me something," he said. "What?" I asked. "Don't carry her guilt," he said. "It was never yours." "I won't," I promised. And I meant it. The house no longer felt hollow. It felt quiet, honest, and for the first time in my life, I understood something profound. Being underestimated isn't always a curse. Sometimes it's cover. The end didn't arrive with shouting or satisfaction.
It arrived quietly, the way truth often does, without ceremony, without witnesses, without asking permission. My grandfather passed away on a Tuesday morning, not suddenly, not violently, just gently, as if he'd finished saying everything he needed to say and decided the rest could unfold without him. I was holding his hand when it happened. The room was filled with soft light, the kind that makes time feel suspended. His breathing slowed, then stilled, and for a moment I thought he might speak again. He didn't, but the look on his face, calm, certain, told me everything. He had no regrets. I stayed there long after the nurse quietly confirmed what I already knew, long after paperwork was mentioned, long after condolences were offered in hushed tones. I stayed because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone else to tell me what came next. I already knew. The reading of the trust happened 2 weeks later, not in a grand office, not surrounded by family, just me, my lawyer, and a quiet conference room that smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. My mother wasn't there. She wasn't invited. Legally, she couldn't be. The irony didn't escape me. For years, she'd positioned herself as the gatekeeper of everything important, decisions, access, approval, and now, when something actually mattered, she had no seat at the table. Mr. Callahan spoke calmly, professionally, reading from documents I already knew by heart, but hearing it out loud, official, irreversible, hit differently. The Whitmore Trust was mine. All of it. The properties, the accounts, the investments, not because I demanded them, not because I fought, but because someone who truly knew me had chosen me deliberately. When the meeting ended, I didn't rush out. I sat there alone for a moment, hands folded on the table, letting the reality settle. This wasn't just inheritance, it was validation. My mother tried one last time, a voicemail. Her voice was stripped of its usual polish, thin, brittle, exhausted. "You think this means you won, but you've lost your family." I listened to it twice, then I deleted it, because the truth was I hadn't lost my family. I'd lost an illusion.
The illusion that love required permission. The illusion that worth came from approval. The illusion that silence was safer than honesty. And illusions, once shattered, don't leave behind grief. They leave relief. People often assume that when you inherit something substantial, your life changes overnight. It doesn't.
The bills don't magically disappear. The mornings don't suddenly feel lighter. You don't wake up transformed into someone new. What changes is quieter. You stop shrinking. You stop explaining. You stop accepting roles you never auditioned for. I didn't move into the biggest house immediately. I didn't buy anything extravagant. Instead, I did something far more radical. I chose. I chose where to live. I chose who had access to me. I chose what peace looked like. And for the first time, no one questioned my right to do so. At the funeral, my mother sat in the back row. She didn't look at me. I didn't look at her. Not out of anger, but out of finality. Her presence no longer had gravity. When it was my turn to speak, I stood calmly, hands steady, voice clear. I want to talk about my grandfather as a man who understood quiet strength, I said. The kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that waits. I felt eyes on me, but I didn't waver. He believed in paying attention, I continued, in noticing who stays when it's inconvenient, who listens instead of taking, who doesn't need to be loud to be solid. My voice caught briefly, but I didn't stop. He taught me that being underestimated isn't weakness, it's freedom. I didn't mention the trust. I didn't mention the betrayal. I didn't need to. Everyone already knew who he'd chosen. After the funeral, people approached me quietly, some with apologies, some with regret, some with admiration they hadn't felt safe expressing before. I accepted none of it personally, because this wasn't about being seen now. It was about being free. My stepfather shook my hand awkwardly before leaving. "You were never nobody," he said quietly. I nodded once. "I know," I replied. And that was the end of that conversation. The house was sold 6 months later. I didn't want to live inside walls that held too many ghosts. Instead, I kept what mattered: my grandfather's tools, his journals, the wooden box of photographs. I framed one picture in particular, me sitting on his shoulders, laughing without fear. That girl had always existed. She'd just been told to forget herself. The last thing my mother did was send a legal challenge. It failed, quickly, decisively, because she had nothing left to stand on. No documents, no authority, no leverage. She'd built her power on the assumption that I wouldn't notice. That assumption cost her everything. People still ask me sometimes if I regret how it ended, if I wish I'd tried harder to keep the peace. I always answer the same way. Peace that requires erasure isn't peace, it's surrender. And I didn't surrender. I survived. I stood still long enough for the truth to reveal itself. I listened. I paid attention. And when the moment came, I didn't beg to be seen. I simply stepped into the space that had been waiting for me all along, the space my grandfather protected, the space my mother thought she could steal, the space where I was never nobody. I was always the one who would inherit more than money. I inherited clarity, and that changed everything.